Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. This video is intended to be my final breakdown ahead of Lucas Browne versus Dillian Whyte, which will of course include a prediction as to the winner. Now, I've got a few thoughts on this one, so we'll have to see how it goes. There's the potential that this is going to be a slightly longer prediction video than normal, so strap yourselves in. You never know, maybe I'll sort of find a way of being concise at some point in the video and it will not end up being that long. We'll have to see how it works out. Dillian Whyte versus Lucas Browne. I think we can all agree, two engaging characters, two good talkers, two guys who we like to see interviewed. But what will they actually be like when they step into the ring against each other this Saturday night? Let's start with Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte is a guy who, you know, I've been following on this channel for quite a long time. I've actually been doing videos on Dillian Whyte way prior to when he fought Anthony Joshua. Long-time subscribers will know that. I think as Dillian Whyte has stepped up through the levels, my overriding thoughts on Dillian Whyte is that he is a European level fighter. On the way up, he was branded very much as a big power puncher. Of his 23 fights, 16 of them have ended in a Dillian Whyte stoppage, so he does have a decent KO ratio. But what you'll notice is as he's fought the higher level of opposition from his career, those knockouts have maybe started to dry up ever so slightly. When he fought Robert Helenius, that went the distance. When he fought Derek Chisora, that went the distance. When he fought David Allen, you know, that went the distance. He did secure a retirement against Ian Lewison, but if I recall, at no stage was he able to drop Ian Lewison or, you know, or anything of that nature. So, for me, Dillian Whyte, he's a guy with respectable power, without being as big a puncher as he's billed at. In terms of his other pros, I think for a big guy, and Dillian Whyte is a very big man, he comes into the ring with very high output. You know, he's got a good work rate. He seems to have naturally quite good stamina. I think Dillian Whyte's durability is above average. I am not someone who believes that Dillian Whyte has the most iron chin in the world. You know, a lot of people talk about Dillian Whyte's iron chin on the basis of, you know, how long he lasted against Joshua. But to be honest, in that Joshua fight, he was getting wobbled as early as the first round, and he didn't end up lasting as long as the likes of a Dominic Breazeale or a Carlos Takam, for example. Also, subsequently, I believe he was wobbled once or twice by the likes of Derek Chisora and the likes of Robert Helenius. So I think Dillian Whyte has above average durability, but I don't think it's as exceptional as it's branded. So, you know, with Dillian Whyte, for me, there is a little bit of hype still around him. You know, he's branded as this big puncher. I think he's an above average puncher. He's branded as this iron-chinned guy. You know, I think he's got an above average chin. I do think his work rate's good. I do think he, you know, really does come to win. He comes to fight. He throws a lot of punches with bad intentions. And I think he's got, you know, decent stamina. And if this is a tight fight going into the last two rounds when both guys are tiring, I think you'd want to be with Dillian Whyte on that occasion. You know, I think he's the guy you'd back here to have the more freshness and the higher output going forward. Fundamentally, with Dillian Whyte, my biggest concern about Dillian Whyte is his technique. And I know that's a fairly obvious thing to say. Just going to have to give me 2 seconds. I just need to plug the laptop charger in, or it's gonna die as we're recording. There you go. Height of professionalism on this channel. So my fundamental concern about Dillian Whyte is the technique. It's the sort of way his punches flow. It's the construction of his punches. You know, even from the way he throws a jab, I don't believe that the jab is thrown correctly. I don't believe that there's smoothness to the way he constructs punches, especially with combinations. And I feel because of that lack of smoothness, sometimes the punches take longer to arrive. In other words, they're a bit slower. Often they're quite wide, often they're quite looping. And I guess I'd also say that, you know, maybe he leaves himself very open to getting countered defensively, you know, when he is engaging. I think he's quite reckless, you know, and sometimes he kind of neglects that defense, really. If you compare, I mean, when I talk about Dillian Whyte being a European level fighter, for me, you've got the elite of the game. You've got your Joshuas, your Wilders, your Furies, your Parkers. Maybe you want to throw in Povetkin. Maybe you want to talk about a Klitschko when he was still in the game. I just don't think he's got the technique of those guys. You know, I think those guys would potentially have a real boxing advantage over a Dillian Whyte. And I suspect that in 3 or 4 years' time, there is a real probability that Dillian Whyte's resume will potentially look like Derek Chisora's resume. You know, been involved in some good fights, performed really credibly, shown a lot of heart, but probably continues to come up short at the top level. I suspect the blueprint for beating Dillian Whyte is actually yet to be established. You know, I do not think that the way to beat Dillian Whyte is yet really in the public eye. I think the way to beat Dillian Whyte is the same way you'd beat a Derek Chisora. It's look at what Tyson Fury did against Derek Chisora. Look at what Ajit Kabayel did against Derek Chisora. I actually think I know they hate each other. I think the similarities between Whyte and Chisora are actually there to be seen. You know, I think they bring a similar style. I think they've got a similar build, similar weaknesses, and I think a fighter who can, you know, really box like a high-level amateur, someone who can get up on their toes, move around, use the size of the ring, pump the jab, fast combinations, get out of there, classic ABC outside boxing. I think that kind of fighter gives Dillian Whyte a world of bother. You know, I just don't see him having the high-level technique, but I do think he's a danger. I do think he goes into fights with, you know, a real chance of causing upsets, even in the big fights, because unlike Derek Chisora, Dillian Whyte will likely turn up in far better shape, and unlike Derek Chisora, Dillian Whyte, I think, even though I've said he isn't the mega puncher he's cracked out to be, I do think he's got power of note to keep people honest, and I think Chisora's power is probably lacking at that Euro level, shall I say. He's going up against Lucas Browne. Now, Lucas Browne's a very, very hard guy to sum up. Lucas Browne, his biggest win, obviously, over 2 years ago now, March 2016, where he fought Ruslan Chagayev for the WBA World Heavyweight title, and he won that fight by stoppage. Browne actually comes to the ring undefeated, 25-0 with 22 KOs, so an 88% KO ratio. Now, Lucas Browne is a very, very hard guy to sum up. Let's start by talking about that Chagayev fight. In the Chagayev fight, that was the best version I've seen of Lucas Browne by a country mile. Browne came in light for the fight. He was light on his toes. He showed good movement. He actually outmaneuvered Chagayev for large portions of the fight. He showed improved boxing. You know, my belief was that because he'd come in lighter, he was able to move like we haven't seen him before. He was able to throw punches like we haven't seen him being able to before. You know, he was able to use his jab. He was able to throw combinations. He was a lot quicker, a lot more agile in there. Quick on his feet, quick in terms of his hand speed, quick in terms of his combinations. You know, I liked what I saw from Lucas Browne in that fight. Clearly, he's a heavy-handed guy. Again, I don't think he's a Deontay Wilder puncher. I don't think he's an Anthony Joshua puncher. If you look at Lucas Browne's resume, he did get the stoppage over Ruslan Chagayev, but you have to ask yourself who are the other notable wins in his career. And really, the second best person he's probably beaten is Andre Rudenko. Now, Rudenko's a good yardstick, but Rudenko is not someone you'd probably have in your top 20, 30, maybe even not your top 40 heavyweights currently active in the sport. So I don't think he's been fully tested in the heavyweight division. He, as I say, there was the Ruslan Chagayev fight. Ruslan Chagayev is a very good yardstick, but that was a Chagayev very much at the end of his career. So it's kind of hard to know exactly where Lucas Browne is at. It is also worth noting that in that Chagayev fight, despite the fact Chagayev was at the end of his career, Chagayev caused Browne a load of problems. That wasn't just, you know, Browne going out there and destroying Chagayev. You know, Chagayev hurt him, took many rounds off him, pressured him. Chagayev looked like winning that fight at points in the fight. So that wasn't easy work for Lucas Browne. It was a very, very competitive fight. You know, but based on that fight alone, I really liked what I saw in Lucas Browne. Could you look at that Lucas Browne and say that he's an elite heavyweight? Could you look at that Lucas Browne and say that he'll, you know, go out and beat a Joshua or go out and beat a Wilder? For me, probably not. But I think that Lucas Browne is one of the more convincing contenders in the heavyweight division. I certainly think he's well in the top 10 based on that performance, and not at number 10 or number 9 either, you know, higher up than that. That Lucas Browne was a real good fighter. So I'm guessing what I'm getting to here is, based on that Lucas Browne who turned up against Ruslan Chagayev, I think that he could well beat Dillian Whyte. And in fact, if the same Lucas Browne turned up against Ruslan Chagayev, I would be very, very comfortable picking Lucas Browne to beat Dillian Whyte. But I'm not going to do that because there's too many risk factors attached, which we'll come to in just a minute. But let's talk about that sort of peak Lucas Browne. If that peak Lucas Browne does turn up, I think he's got the better movement. I think he's got the better distance. I think he's got the better boxing. I think he's got the better construction of punches. I think he's probably the bigger hitter. And, you know, Lucas Browne is a big, tough man as well. He's not someone who's going to get wiped out by Dillian Whyte in a round or two. You know, I think at that point it becomes a very, very tough fight for Dillian Whyte, and a fight where Lucas Browne has a huge amount of advantages. However, that is me basing a fight on a single piece of evidence from Lucas Browne. And unfortunately, Lucas Browne's career cannot be summed up with a single piece of evidence, because I've seen a lot of Lucas Browne fights over the years. I've seen Lucas Browne, Matthew Greer, Lucas Browne, Julius Long, Rudenko, Welliver, Baholi, Richard Towers, James Toney, you know, Jason Gavern. I've seen a lot of the old Lucas Browne fights. And the truth is that the average Lucas Browne fight does not look like that Ruslan Chagayev fight. I actually used to have a phrase on this channel, which I've kind of retired, but the phrase I used was educated bouncer. And I remember at one point, I put Lucas Browne very much into the educated bouncer category. You know, he proved me wrong, by the way, on Ruslan Chagayev. You know, he proved he was had a lot higher upside than that. But fundamentally, I looked at Lucas Browne as a guy who was too slow, too plodding, too heavy. And it was interesting, in all those fights, when he turned up to the vast majority of them too heavy, we never got to see the movement, we never got to see the skill, we never got to see the boxing of Browne Chagayev. And for me, that weight was absolutely critical to his performance against Ruslan Chagayev. And I've got to say that if we eliminate that Ruslan Chagayev fight, and if we look at the rest of Browne's body of work, then it's quite possible to make the argument that Browne has never beaten anyone in the top 30 or the top 40 of the heavyweight division. And really, looking at him stylistically and looking at the attributes that he brings to the ring, it's actually quite easy to say that he very much falls into the Derek Chisora, Dillian Whyte, Lucas Browne category. You know, he's another guy who at times has shown very sloppy construction of punches, a lack of athleticism, a lack of speed. You know, he very much falls into that big, tough guy, naturally a bit heavy-handed, you know, but probably not the most skilled, probably not going to get to the top of the sport. You know, that's very much the category I'd have him in. Now, that Ruslan Chagayev fight, as you guys know, is shrouded in controversy. Subsequent to the fight, Lucas Browne failed a performance-enhancing drug test. Subsequent to that performance-enhancing drug test, Lucas Browne failed a secondary performance-enhancing drug test. Now, there's all sorts of discussion as to these failed tests. You know, Lucas Browne has said he was set up in Chechnya for the first failed test, and the second one was a mistake buying an over-the-counter supplement. I don't know. It's not my job to judge. As I've said many times on this channel, I'm not an expert on performance-enhancing drug use. But what I will say is the fight that Lucas Browne failed a performance-enhancing drug test was by far the best performance of Lucas Browne's career, and was so much better than any other performance that he actually didn't even look like the same fighter to me as the guy who'd fought Andrei Rudenko. Could that be an unhappy coincidence? Could Lucas Browne have just got himself in better shape because this was his world title fight? Possibly. I can't rule it out. But you also, from a fan perspective, have to at least acknowledge the possibility that that Lucas Browne, who was so different to all the other Lucas Brownes, was maybe different because of the fact he had a performance-enhancing drug in his system, which the failed test told us that he did. So that Chagayev fight is shrouded in controversy. In addition to that, Lucas Browne is now 38 years old. You know, it is very, very possible that his peak years are behind him. In addition to that, Lucas Browne has been critically inactive. His last fight, an easy win over an overmatched journeyman, was in June 2017. Realistically, he didn't have a fight of note in 2017. You know, that was too easy work for him to really be considered a fight. He only fought Chigaev in 2016, and he only fought Julius Long in 2015. Thus, when he steps into the ring against Dillian Whyte, he will have only had 3 professional fights since 2014. He won't have fought for 9 months. You know, his last notable fight will be over 24 months ago. The inactivity is a real issue, especially when you combine that with his age. You know, this is a guy who's getting older. This is a guy who hasn't been active. You know, the combination of those two is a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous game. In addition to that, you have to factor in the Lucas Browne weight. You know, I don't have his weights in front of me from previous fights, but what I will say is visually, he has always looked a bit slow, a bit plodding, a bit sloppy when he's come in noticeably heavier. The Chigaev fight, we saw him lighter, we saw the improvements pretty instantaneously. Now, Lucas Browne is very heavy in the build-up to this fight. You know, you could see with the naked eye quite how heavy he was in the pre-fight build-up for this fight. And although I'm sure he will lose weight during the camp, Lucas Browne himself has acknowledged he will be nowhere near the weight that he was for the Ruslan Chigaev fight. Now that's a real concern to me, because the heavy Browne is for me a plodding Browne, a low output Browne, a Browne who struggles to move, and a Browne who struggles to get combinations off. For me, that Browne, that heavier Browne, would not have anywhere near as many advantages over a guy like Dillian Whyte as the Lucas Browne who fought Ruslan Chigaev. So there's a huge amount of risk factors attached to Lucas Browne. Is Lucas Browne too old? Has Lucas Browne been too inactive? Is Lucas Browne too heavy to give a fair showing? Is Lucas Browne the same fighter? Now we presume he's not on performance-enhancing drugs. There are 4 very substantial risk factors for anyone considering betting on Lucas Browne in this fight. And to be honest, the combination of those 4 risk factors has actually put me well off picking Lucas Browne or considering Lucas Browne in this fight. I believe there's far too much against Lucas Browne to beat a guy like Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte is a lot younger, he's a lot fresher, he's been increasingly active, he's had some of the biggest fights in his career in recent years. He's coming into this fight in better shape than we've seen of previous versions of Dillian Whyte. And I think this fight has basically been very, very well timed for Dillian Whyte because of the combination of risk factors surrounding Lucas Browne. From a stylistic perspective, I would imagine this will be a tentative fight. You know, Eddie Hearn, when it was initially announced, branded it as an all-out war. I suspect we won't see that. Both of these guys like to play around with their jab. Both of them likes to utilise distance a little bit. You know, neither of them are, whilst they're both open to getting involved in a war and getting sucked into a battle in the middle to late rounds, for me, I suspect this will be a tentative start where both guys are aware of the other one's power and neither guy will want to make a mistake. After 3 or 4 rounds of that, I think it will be clear who the fitter man is. I think Lucas Browne, at his age, with his inactivity, at his weight, could well be blowing, could well be, you know, becoming lower output already at that stage of the fight. And that's when I expect to see Dillian Whyte take over. Look, we haven't seen the weigh-in for this fight just yet. Lucas Browne could turn up in amazing physical shape. He could turn up like he was in the Chigaev fight. And if he was, maybe I'll do another video and change my mind in this prediction. But Lucas Browne I've seen in the build-up to this fight, no way will he be coming in the same shape as Chigaev. I expect to see the same Lucas Browne who fought Andre Rudenko, that kind of character. And I expect Dillian Whyte will have far too much for that sort of character. I think we'll see a tentative opening, and in the middle rounds, we will see Dillian Whyte take over and really win the fight by output. It wouldn't even surprise me if some of the rounds in this fight resemble Helenius versus Dillian Whyte, in that you have Dillian Whyte just coming forward, throwing a jab, winning rounds in almost like a sparring type of mentality. I do think it will be a better fight than Hellenius. I do think it will heat up. I don't think Browne is the kind of character just to take a beating for 12 rounds. I think he will gamble. I think he will suck Dillian Whyte into a war at some point. But I really think Dillian Whyte's stamina, youth, volume will be the key to this fight. And I think he will power home in the middle rounds of this fight. For what it's worth, I actually expect there's a high probability the fight will go to distance. I've talked at the beginning of this that I think both guys' power is maybe ever so slightly overhyped. And I've also said that whilst both guys can be hurt, they're both fighters with durability that you'd class as above average. So I don't think, I know it's being branded as a war, and the consensus probably is that it won't go to distance. I wouldn't be surprised if it does go to distance. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if there are more timid rounds, more ponderous rounds, and I wouldn't be surprised if before you know it, this fight is in the second half and the guys are starting to tire, the same snap isn't quite there in the punches, and it ends up going the distance. If that is the case, you know, Dillian Whyte being the home fighter, clearly, you know, you just think there'd be a greater likelihood of him winning a points decision. You'd also have to factor in the fact that with Dillian Whyte's style, which is certainly a higher output than a heavy Lucas Browne, you know, the judges may be inclined to side with Whyte's more sort of volume approach if the fight goes in that way. So for Lucas Browne, you know, he's been talking a lot in the fight about having enough power to end the fight with 1 point, and maybe he is going into this fight looking for the knockout. Maybe he's going in there looking for one big punch. My concern is that a heavy Lucas Browne that we've seen in previous years won't find it quite as easy to land that big punch as the light, mobile, fast Lucas Browne we saw against Ruslan Chagayev. You know, I think that weight is the absolute key to Lucas Browne and his performances, and I do believe he's fallen at the first hurdle. Can you write Lucas Browne out? No. Whyte is a fighter with frailties. Whyte is a fighter who can be beaten. Lucas Browne probably does have enough power to take out Dillian Whyte if he catches Dillian Whyte clean. But on the balance of probabilities, I'm going to side with Dillian Whyte to win the fight on points. I think there's too many risk factors attached to Lucas Browne, as I've detailed in this. I think it will be tentative, and then I think when guys start to tire and they're two big guys throwing punches with bad intentions, I think Dillian Whyte is going to be the substantially lighter, fresher guy with the higher output, and I think he'll jab and toy his way to winning a points decision. I actually suspect, you know, it'll be relatively clear. I'm not going to say it won't be competitive, but I'm not expecting 7 rounds to 5, you know, anything like that. It could be slightly wider for that. Lucas Browne, for me, is, well, the way I see it, Lucas Browne who beat Ruslan Chagayev is easily a top 10 fighter. The Lucas Browne who fought Rudenko or Julius Long, I think he's a level below Dillian Whyte, in fact. I think he's so slow, and we've got to assume that this Lucas Browne would actually have got worse based on the age and based on the inactivity. So, you know, unless we see a huge surprise on the scales, I'm going Dillian Whyte on points. I think it's an interesting fight. I think they're interesting characters. I hope it's a great fight. I hope it's really lively. But I do suspect that what we are going to see here is a tentative fight that potentially lacks technique, that potentially lacks speed, and I do suspect that this fight is timed all right for Dillian Whyte and all wrong for Lucas Browne. Let me know your comments, guys. Hit me up in the comment section below. I understand there is a substantial Lucas Browne following out there. You know, a lot of you guys thinking that the Lucas Browne who was in with Chagayev is just too much for Dillian Whyte. Let me hear your thoughts on those risk factors that I've detailed. Age, inactivity, performance-enhancing drugs, weight. Do you agree with me that weight is the absolute key to Lucas Browne? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up. If you're new, please subscribe. I will, of course, be doing a post-fight reaction video to this fight, so make sure you subscribe so you can check that out. As always, appreciate you guys tuning into the channel. Many thanks for watching.